The Arizona sun burned hot in the summer of 1886. Dust covered everything at Fort Bowie, the wooden buildings, the soldiers' uniforms, and the faces of the Apache people who had just been brought in. They were prisoners now, though nobody used that word out loud. Among the crowd stood a young woman who looked completely out of place. Her skin was pale, almost white like fresh milk. Her hair was even stranger, blonde so light it looked almost silver in the harsh sunlight. She was 18 years old and her name was Maria Sandoval, though she barely remembered that name. The soldiers couldn't stop staring at her. Here was a white girl, or at least she looked white, but she wore Apache clothing. Buckskin dress, moccasins worn soft from walking, and beaded jewelry made by Apache hands. When the soldiers tried to speak to her in English, she looked at them with confusion in her pale blue eyes. But when the Apache people spoke, she answered them fluently in their own language. Her story was one that happened more often than people wanted to admit back then. When Maria was just a baby, maybe 6 months old, Chiricahua Apache raiders had attacked a small Mexican settlement near Tucson. Her parents were killed. The Apache women found her crying in a wooden cradle, and one of them, a woman whose own baby had died weeks before, picked her up. Instead of leaving her there to die in the heat, the woman took her. That Apache woman raised Maria as her own daughter. She fed her, taught her, loved her. Maria learned to gather wild plants, to tan hides, to move quietly through the desert. She learned the songs and stories. She learned what it meant to be Apache, even though her skin told a different story. Now, after Geronimo's final surrender, all of that was coming to an end. The free Apache life was over. The American government had decided that every Apache person, man, woman, and child, would be rounded up and sent to reservations. Some would be sent even farther, to boarding schools in the East where they would be forced to forget everything they knew. Maria stood near the holding pens, away from the soldiers but close to the Apache families. In her arms she held 2 babies, twin boys maybe 4 months old. Their mother had died 3 days ago during the forced march to the fort. She had been weak, sick with fever, and the soldiers wouldn't stop the march to let her rest. When she finally collapsed, Maria had been there. The dying woman had pressed her babies into Maria's arms and whispered, "Keep them together." "Promise me," Maria had promised. Now she sat with these 2 tiny lives depending on her, and she had no idea what would happen next. The twins had dark hair, thick and black. Their eyes were brown, deep and alert in a way that seemed too knowing for babies so young. Maria had been caring for them the best she could, but it was hard. Other Apache women helped when the soldiers weren't watching, sharing what little food they had, showing her how to keep the babies quiet and calm. The fort was chaos. Families were being separated and registered. The soldiers were writing down names, assigning numbers. They were trying to decide who would go where. Children were being pulled away from their parents, and the sound of crying filled the air constantly. It was heartbreaking to watch. Maria understood something that many of the soldiers didn't. She had lived with the Apache people long enough to know that family meant everything to them. Taking children away wasn't just cruel. It was like trying to kill their culture, their future, their soul. And she could see it in the eyes of the mothers who had their children ripped from their arms. Something was dying here, and it wasn't just people. One of the older Apache men, a warrior named Nietzsche who had ridden with Geronimo himself, walked past her. He paused and looked down at the twins in her arms. His face was lined and weathered, and there was such sadness in his eyes that Maria almost looked away. "Those boys," he said quietly in Apache.
"They have no one now but you." "I know," Maria whispered back.
"I won't let them be alone," Nietzsche nodded slowly.
"The White Eyes are afraid of us."
"That's why they take our children. If they raise them in their schools, teach them to hate being Apache, then in 1 generation we disappear. No war needed." Maria had already figured this out. She held the twins closer. "You are caught between 2 worlds, Pale One," Nietzsche continued. "Neither side knows what to do with you. But maybe that means you can protect these boys in ways we cannot." Before she could respond, he walked away. The soldiers were calling for another group to be processed, and Nietzsche's family was among them. As the sun began to set, turning the sky orange and red, Maria found a quiet corner in the women's area. She sat down with her back against the rough wooden wall and adjusted the twins so they were comfortable. One of them, the slightly bigger one, made a small sound in his sleep. She touched his tiny hand and his fingers wrapped around hers instinctively. She thought about names. The Apache woman who raised her had taught her that names were important. They held power and meaning. Looking at the bigger twin, she decided to call him Little Hawk. He seemed alert and watchful even as a baby. The smaller one, who made soft cooing sounds, she named Singing Wind. As darkness fell over Fort Bowie, Maria sat there with those two babies and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know that in the morning a colonel would come with an impossible choice. She didn't know that her world was about to be torn apart in a way she couldn't imagine, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made a promise to their dying mother. She would keep these boys together no matter what it cost her. Even if she didn't know how yet, she would find a way. The night air grew cold, as it always did in the desert. Maria pulled a thin blanket over the three of them and closed her eyes. Around her, other Apache women did the same, holding their children close, not knowing which of them would still have their families intact when the sun rose again. Tomorrow would bring answers. But tonight, in this moment, the twins were safe in her arms, and for now that had to be enough. Colonel James Hendricks had been stationed at Fort Bowie for 3 years, and he thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. This morning, as he walked through the holding areas checking on the Apache prisoners, he spotted something that made him stop in his tracks. There was that girl again. The white one who dressed and acted like an Apache. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground, 2 Indian babies in her lap, and she was singing to them. Not in English or Spanish, but in Apache. Her voice was soft and gentle, and the babies seemed calm despite all the noise and chaos around them. Hendricks had read her file. Born Maria Sandoval to Mexican settlers, taken by Apache raiders as an infant, raised as one of them. On paper, she was white. In reality, she was something else entirely. Something that didn't fit into any neat category. This made her a problem. The colonel had his orders clear and direct from Washington. All Apache children between the ages of 4 and 16 were to be sent to boarding schools back east. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania was the main destination. There they would be taught English, Christianity, and American ways. Their hair would be cut, their clothes changed, their names replaced with English ones. The government called it education. The Apache called it something much worse. But what about this girl? She wasn't Apache by blood. Technically, she was a freed captive, which meant she could choose where to go. The babies, though, were a different matter. They were Apache, and they fell under the government's Indian policy. Hendricks approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. An interpreter named Diego walked beside him, a Mexican man who spoke both Apache and English. The colonel had learned that direct communication was often better, but he wasn't sure how much English the girl actually understood. "Miss Sandoval," he said, his voice carrying authority even when he tried to sound gentle. Maria looked up at him. Those pale blue eyes showed no fear, only wariness. She didn't respond. "Tell her we need to talk," Hendricks said to Diego. Diego spoke in Apache, and Maria's expression shifted slightly. She answered in Apache, her voice steady. "She says she understands English perfectly well," Diego translated. "She just chooses when to use it." Hendricks felt his face flush slightly. Of course, she was testing him, testing all of them. Smart girl. "Miss Sandoval," he started again, "you are not Apache by birth. You were taken as an infant, but you are Mexican by blood. We have located records of your birth in Tucson. This means you have options that others here do not." Maria listened but said nothing. One of the twins started fussing and she adjusted him gently, patting his back until he settled. The colonel continued, "There is a Catholic mission in Tucson. Good sisters who help young women who have been through difficult circumstances. They can take you in, help you learn to live in proper society again. They will give you education, training, perhaps help you find work as a seamstress or teacher. You could have a real life, a future." Still, Maria said nothing. Her silence was unnerving. Hendricks pushed forward. "You don't belong here, Miss Sandoval. Look around you. These people are being sent to reservations, to places where life will be hard. Some of the children are being sent away for their own good, to receive education and opportunities. But you can leave all of this behind. Start fresh." Finally, Maria spoke. Her English was accented but clear. "And them?" She looked down at the twins. "What happens to them?" This was the part Hendricks had been dreading. He glanced at Diego, then back at the girl. "The children are a separate matter. They are Apache, and they fall under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Children under 4 are typically allowed to stay with family members on the reservation, but these babies have no family. Their mother is dead and no other relatives have claimed them. I claim them, Maria said firmly. You are not a relative. I am what they have. Their mother gave them to me before she died. That makes them mine, Hendricks sighed. He had expected this. Miss Sandoval, the policy is clear. These children need to be placed in proper care. However, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Given the unusual circumstances, we might be able to make an arrangement. If you agree to go to the mission in Tucson, we could allow you to take one of the babies with you. The sisters would help you care for it. One child, placed in a Christian home learning American ways. That's better than both of them ending up in some uncertain situation on a reservation. The words hung in the air like poison. Maria's face went completely still. Around them, the normal sounds of the fort seemed to fade away. One, she whispered. You want me to choose one? I understand it's difficult, but think practically. You are young, alone, with no resources. How can you possibly care for 2 infants? One is already a challenge. The mission can help you with one child. He will have food, shelter, education. The other will be placed in a good Apache family on the San Carlos reservation. Both will be cared for. It's the best solution. Maria looked down at the twins. Little Hawk was sleeping peacefully. Singing Wind was awake, his dark eyes staring up at her with that strange awareness babies sometimes have. She touched each of their faces, her pale fingers gentle against their brown skin. When she looked back up at Hendricks, there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady and cold. Who decides? If I must only take one, who chooses which one? You would, of course. You have been caring for them. You would know which one? No. The word cut through his explanation like a knife. I will not choose. I cannot choose. They are brothers, twins. To separate them is cruel. To force me to decide which one loses his brother is impossible. Hendricks felt his patience thinning. Miss Sandoval, I am trying to help you. I am offering you a way out of this situation. Many Apache mothers are having all of their children taken away and sent hundreds of miles to boarding schools. I am giving you the chance to keep one of these babies and build a life. That is generous. Generous, Maria repeated, and there was something dangerous in her tone. You call it generous to rip apart what little these babies have left? Their mother is dead. Their father is dead. All they have is each other and me. And you want me to destroy that because it is convenient for your paperwork? It is not about convenience. It is about what is possible within the law and regulations. Then your laws are wrong. The colonel's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by a teenage girl. Miss Sandoval, you need to be realistic. Look around you. The Apache way of life is ending. These children need to adapt to the new world. Separating them might seem harsh, but it may actually be a kindness. One raised in a Christian home in Tucson will have opportunities. The other, raised on a reservation, will maintain some connection to Apache culture. Between them, they represent both paths forward. Maria stood up slowly, carefully balancing both babies. She was tall for a woman, nearly as tall as the colonel himself. When she looked at him now, there was something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. It was not anger exactly, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe, or pity. You give me 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days, and then I give you my answer. It was not a request. Hendricks found himself nodding before he realized he had agreed. 3 days. But Miss Sandoval, the situation will not change. Those are the options available. I suggest you use the time to accept what must be done. Maria turned away from him without another word, walking back to the corner where she had been sitting. The other Apache women made space for her, closing around her protectively once she sat down. Hendricks watched her go, feeling oddly unsettled. He had delivered harder news than this before. He had overseen the separation of dozens of Apache families in just the past week alone. Why did this one girl with 2 babies make him feel like he had done something wrong? He shook his head and walked away. He had his orders. The government had a plan for dealing with the Indian problem, and personal feelings could not interfere with policy. The girl would see reason eventually. She would have to. But as he left the holding area, he could not shake the image of those pale blue eyes looking at him with such devastating clarity, as if she could see right through all his justifications to the cruelty underneath. For 3 days, Maria did not speak to anyone except the babies. She held Little Hawk and Singing Wind close to her chest, feeding them when they were hungry, changing their wrappings when needed, singing soft Apache lullabies when they cried. But to every adult who tried to talk to her, soldier or Apache, she remained silent as stone. The other Apache women understood. They brought her what little food they could spare from their own meager rations. A piece of bread here, some dried meat there. One old grandmother brought her a cup of weak broth and placed it in her hands without saying a word, just squeezed her shoulder gently before walking away. On the first night, Maria could not sleep at all. She lay on the hard ground with the twins nestled against her, and her mind spun in circles. How could anyone make such a choice? Little Hawk was slightly bigger, stronger, more likely to survive the harsh conditions wherever he ended up. But did that mean she should keep him and send away Singing Wind? Or should she keep the smaller, more vulnerable one and trust that Little Hawk's strength would help him survive without her? The very thought made her sick to her stomach. These were babies, not objects to be divided up based on practical considerations. They were brothers who had already lost everything. How could she take away the one thing they had left each other? On the second day, as the sun climbed high and beat down mercilessly on the fort, an old Apache man made his way over to where Maria sat. His name was Nietzsche, and everyone treated him with deep respect. He had been a warrior, a real one, riding with Geronimo and the last free Apache bands. Now he was old and tired, his face lined with more sorrow than age. Nietzsche sat down beside Maria without asking permission. For a long time he said nothing. He just sat there watching the activity in the fort, watching families being torn apart as soldiers took children away to be loaded onto wagons headed east. Finally, he spoke in Apache, his voice low and rough. I had a daughter once. Her name was Sky Reaches Dawn. She was 6 years old and she could run faster than any of the boys in our camp. She laughed all the time, that girl, made everyone around her smile even in hard times. Maria listened, still holding the twins. 3 days ago they took her, put her on a wagon with 30 other children, sent them to some school in Santa Fe where they will cut her hair and change her name and beat her if she speaks our language. Nietzsche's voice cracked slightly. I could not stop them. Her mother screamed and fought, and they had to hold her back. My daughter looked at me as they drove away, and her eyes asked me why I was not saving her. But I had no answer. Maria felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I am sorry, she whispered. The White Eyes say they are helping us. They say our children will learn to read and write, will have better lives. But what kind of life is it when you forget who you are? When you forget your mother's face and your father's songs? Nietzsche shook his head slowly. They are killing us without bullets. Slower, but just as certain. He looked at the twins in Maria's arms. Those boys. They have no family left except you. The soldiers want you to choose between them because it is easier for their paperwork, easier for their conscience. If you choose, then they can say you agreed. They can say it was your decision. But I cannot choose, Maria said, her voice breaking. How can I? They are the same to me. I love them both. I know. Nietzsche was quiet for a moment. The White Eyes want to break us by taking our children. Every child they take is a piece of our future they steal. But you, Pale One, you are a bridge between worlds. You look like them, but you are one of us. Maybe that means something. Maybe that gives you power they do not expect. What power? I am just one person. I have nothing. You have a choice they are forcing on you, but maybe you do not have to accept their choices. Maybe you can make them see what they are really asking. Nietzsche stood up slowly, his old bones creaking. Whatever you decide, do not let them make you believe this is your fault. This is their doing, not yours. Remember that. He walked away, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts once more. That night, as darkness fell over the fort, Maria held both babies and tried to imagine the future. If she took Little Hawk to Tucson, what would happen to Singing Wind? Would he be given to an Apache family on the reservation? Would they love him? Would they tell him he had a brother somewhere? And what about Little Hawk? Would he grow up never knowing he was Apache? Never knowing his twin brother existed? Or if she chose Singing Wind instead, the same questions applied in reverse. How would either of them feel when they were old enough to understand that they had been separated on purpose? Would they hate her for choosing? Would they wonder their whole lives about the brother they lost? The more she thought about it, the more impossible it became. There was no good choice. Every option led to pain and loss and broken bonds. The colonel had framed it as a generous offer, but it was really a cruel trap. No matter what she chose, she would be destroying something precious. On the third morning, Maria woke with a strange sense of calm. She had not slept much, but something had shifted inside her during the dark hours. She realized that Nietzsche was right. The colonel wanted her to make this choice so that he could avoid responsibility. If she chose, it became her decision, her fault. The government could wash its hands of the cruelty, but what if she refused to play that game? What if she did not accept that these were the only options? Maria stood up, holding both twins carefully. She walked to the communal water barrel and washed her face, then straightened her buckskin dress as best she could. The other Apache women watched her curiously. They could see something had changed. One of the younger women, barely older than Maria herself, approached her. "Are you going to talk to the soldiers?" she asked in Apache. "Yes," Maria replied. "What will you tell them?" Maria looked down at the twins. Both were awake now, their dark eyes looking up at her. "I will tell them the truth, and then we will see what they do with it." The young woman nodded. "Be strong, pale sister. Whatever happens, you have tried to do right by those boys. Their mother's spirit sees that." Maria took a deep breath and walked toward the main office where Colonel Hendricks worked. Several soldiers watched her pass, and she could feel their eyes on her white hair, her Apache clothing, the two brown babies in her arms. She knew she looked strange to them, impossible to categorize. Good. Let them be confused. When she reached the office, she stood outside for a moment, gathering her courage. Inside that building was a man who held the power to decide the fate of these two innocent babies. He had rules and regulations on his side, the entire weight of the government behind him. What did she have? Nothing but a promise made to a dying woman and a love for two babies who were not even hers by blood. But maybe, Maria thought, maybe that was enough. Maybe love and a promise were more powerful than she realized. She pushed open the door and walked inside, ready to face whatever came next. The 3 days were over. It was time to give her answer. Though it would not be the answer the colonel expected. It would not be an answer that fit neatly into his forms and policies. It would be the truth. Raw and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. And the truth, Maria had learned from the Apache, had a power all its own. Colonel Hendricks looked up from his paperwork when the door opened. He had been expecting this. 3 days had passed, and Maria Sandoval was standing in his office doorway, the two Apache babies in her arms as always. Behind her stood Diego the interpreter and a thin, nervous-looking man in a dark suit. The man was Robert Whitney, the Bureau of Indian Affairs representative who had arrived yesterday to oversee the final processing of the Apache prisoners. "Miss Sandoval," Hendricks said, standing up. "Please come in. Have you made your decision?" Maria walked into the office slowly. Her pale face was calm, but Hendricks noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she held the babies. She stopped in the middle of the room right in front of his desk. "I have," she said quietly. Whitney stepped forward, pulling out a leather notebook and a pen. "Excellent. We can get the paperwork started immediately. Which child will you be taking to Tucson?" His voice was businesslike, as if they were discussing a simple transaction. Maria did not answer him. Instead, she kept her eyes on Colonel Hendricks. For a long moment, she just stood there, and the silence in the room grew heavy and uncomfortable. Then, very slowly, Maria began to extend her arms. She held out both babies toward the colonel, offering them to him like precious gifts. "Or sacrifices. Will you take one of them?" she whispered. Her voice was so soft that Hendricks had to lean forward to hear her. But once he heard the words, they hit him like a physical blow. "What?" he said, confused. "Will you take one of them?" Maria repeated louder this time. "You decide. You choose which child loses his brother. You decide which one forgets his language, his people, his past. You choose which one grows up alone, always feeling like something is missing but never knowing what. You make that choice, Colonel, not me." Hendricks took an involuntary step backward. "Now wait just a minute. That is not how this works. You are the one caring for them. You must decide what is best." "Best?" Maria's voice cracked on the word. "You think there is a best choice here? You think one of these options is good? They are both terrible. They both destroy something that should never be destroyed." She moved closer, still holding the babies out toward him. "Look at them, Colonel. Really look at them. They are 4 months old. They are brothers, twins. They came into this world together. Their mother died putting them in my arms and begging me to keep them together. And you are asking me to tear them apart for your convenience." "It is not about convenience," Hendricks protested, though his voice lacked conviction. It is about regulations, about what is possible within the system. Then your system is broken, Maria said flatly. So I am giving you a choice now. You want one of them? You pick. Put your hand on one of these babies and tell me he is the one who will be separated from his brother. Tell me to his face, even though he is too young to understand that you are taking away the only family he has. Go ahead, choose. The room fell completely silent. Diego the interpreter looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Whitney had stopped writing in his notebook and was staring at Maria with something like shock on his face. Colonel Hendricks felt heat rising in his face. Miss Sandoval, you are being unreasonable. I am trying to help you. I am offering you a way forward. Most Apache women are having all of their children taken. I am allowing you to keep one. Allowing, Maria repeated. She laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. You are not allowing me anything. You are forcing me to participate in something cruel so that you can feel less guilty about it. If I choose, then it becomes my decision. Then you can tell yourself, you were just following orders, just doing your job. The blame falls on me instead of you. That is not fair, Hendricks said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they sounded weak. Maria's pale blue eyes were burning now with an intensity that made him want to look away. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that these babies lost their mother? Is it fair that she died because your soldiers would not stop the march long enough to let a sick woman rest? Is it fair that there are children being loaded onto wagons right now, crying for their mothers, being sent to schools where they will be beaten for speaking their own language? She took another step forward, and Hendricks found himself backing up against his own desk. The babies were so close now he could see their tiny fingers, their soft skin, the vulnerable curves of their skulls. Choose, Maria whispered again. Pick one. Right now. If you truly believe this is the right thing to do, then it should be easy for you. Just point to one and say, this one stays, this one goes. Do it. Hendricks looked at the babies, really looked at them for the first time. Up until this moment, they had been abstract problems in his paperwork, numbers to be processed. But now he saw them as individual tiny human beings. The one on the left had a small birthmark on his neck. The one on the right was making soft cooing sounds. They were real. They were people. And Maria was asking him to choose which one would suffer. I cannot, he heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them. I cannot make that choice. It is not my place, and then whose place is it? Maria demanded. You say it is not yours. You say it must be mine, but I am telling you I cannot do it either. No one should be able to do it because it is wrong. It is fundamentally, completely wrong. Whitney finally found his voice. Miss Sandoval, you are being dramatic. Children are separated from families all the time for various reasons. These boys will adapt. They are young enough that they will not even remember each other. In a few years, this will all seem like it was for the best. Maria turned her fierce gaze on him. How dare you? How dare you decide that these boys will not remember each other? How dare you tell me that destroying their bond is acceptable because they will forget? Is that your solution? To create loss so deep that the only way to survive it is to forget it ever existed? Whitney's face flushed red. You are being hysterical. No, Maria said coldly. I am being honest. And you do not like it because it makes you see what you are really doing. You are taking children from families. You are destroying cultures. You are creating orphans and calling it education. And you want me to help you do it by making this choice so you can feel better about yourselves. The door to the office suddenly burst open. Several soldiers had gathered outside, drawn by the raised voices. Among them were some of the Apache women from the holding pens. They could not understand all the English words, but they understood the emotion, the confrontation. Maria turned to face all of them. She was still holding the babies out in front of her, offering them to anyone who would make the choice she refused to make. Does anyone here want to choose? She called out. Anyone want to be the one who separates these brothers? Who wants that on their conscience? No one spoke. The soldiers looked at each other uncomfortably. The Apache women watched with dark, knowing eyes. They had all been through this themselves, or something like it. They knew exactly what Maria was doing. Hendricks felt the weight of all those eyes on him. He was the one in charge. He was the one with the authority and responsibility. But in this moment, faced with this impossible choice that Maria was forcing him to see clearly for what it really was, he felt completely powerless. Miss Sandoval, he said, and his voice came out hoarse. Please, lower your arms. This is not accomplishing anything. It is accomplishing exactly what I intended, Maria replied. You wanted an answer in 3 days. Here is my answer. I will not choose. I cannot choose. And if you force these babies apart, it will be your choice, not mine. I will not give you the comfort of sharing the blame. She finally lowered her arms, pulling the twins back against her chest. They sensed her distress and started to fuss, and she automatically began to rock them gently, soothing them with soft sounds. Hendricks sank down into his chair. He suddenly felt very tired. This girl, this strange white girl raised by Apaches, had just made him see his own orders in a way he had been carefully avoiding. She had stripped away all the official language, all the justifications, and forced him to see the raw cruelty underneath. And she was right. It was cruel. It was all terribly, horribly cruel. But what could he do about it? He had his orders. The policy came from Washington, from men who had never stood in a dusty fort and looked into the eyes of a mother whose child was being taken away. Men who had never held an Apache baby or heard their laughter or watched them play. The silence in the office stretched on. No one knew what to say. Maria had created a moment of truth that no one knew how to escape from. She had asked a question that had no good answer. And in doing so, she had revealed the injustice at the heart of everything they were doing. Outside, the sound of a horse approaching broke the tension. Everyone turned toward the window. A lone rider was coming up to the fort, moving fast. He carried a white flag, which was the only reason the sentries had not fired at him. It was an Apache man, and something about the way he sat his horse suggested this was someone important. Someone who might be about to change everything. The rider dismounted at the main gate, and even from a distance Maria could see that he carried himself differently than the other Apache prisoners. There was pride in his posture, a quiet dignity that had not been beaten down by defeat. The soldiers at the gate checked his white flag and then escorted him into the fort. Colonel Hendricks stepped out of his office, relieved to have an interruption to the uncomfortable confrontation with Maria. She followed him outside, still holding the twins, curious about who this man was. The Apache man was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, with long black hair tied back and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same red rock as the surrounding cliffs. He wore a mixture of Apache and American clothing, buckskin pants but a cotton shirt. His eyes swept across the fort, taking in everything, missing nothing. When his gaze landed on Maria, something flickered in his expression. Recognition maybe, or surprise at seeing someone who looked like her in this place. Then his eyes dropped to the twins in her arms and his face softened slightly. I am Chato, the man said in English that was clear and precise. I have come to speak with Colonel Hendricks about the children being sent away. Hendricks looked surprised. You are Chato? The scout. I was a scout. Before that I was a warrior. Before that, I was a son and a brother and a father. Now I am trying to be whatever will help my people survive what is coming. There was no anger in his voice, just a matter-of-fact weariness that somehow made his words more powerful. This was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and was still trying to find a way forward. What brings you here? Hendricks asked, his official tone returning. I heard about the white woman with the 2 Apache babies. I heard that you want her to choose between them to split brothers apart. Chato's eyes moved back to Maria. Is this true? Before Hendricks could answer, Maria spoke up. Yes. They want me to take one to Tucson and leave the other to be sent to the reservation or maybe to a boarding school later. They say I must choose. Chato nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. And you do not want to choose. I cannot choose. They are brothers, twins. To separate them is wrong. Yes, Chato agreed simply.
It is wrong.
Just as it is wrong that my own daughter was taken 3 weeks ago and sent to a school in Santa Fe. Just as it is wrong that families are being torn apart all across this land. But wrong things are happening every day now, and we must find ways to survive them. He turned back to Colonel Hendricks. I have come with a proposal. I have claimed land on the San Carlos reservation. Not much, but it is recognized by your government. I have papers. He pulled folded documents from inside his shirt and handed them to the colonel. Hendricks took the papers and began reading, his eyebrows rising with each line. Whitney, the bureau representative, crowded close to read over his shoulder. These appear to be legitimate, Whitney said, sounding surprised. You have an allotment of 160 acres, and you have filed for guardianship? Yes, Chato confirmed. I am filing to become the legal guardian of these 2 boys. Their mother was my cousin's wife. That makes me family according to Apache ways. According to your ways, it makes me eligible to petition for guardianship of orphaned relatives. Maria felt her heart leap. She looked at this stranger, this man she had never met before, who was suddenly offering a lifeline she had not known existed. But who helped you with this? Hendricks demanded. Who prepared these documents? A slight smile crossed Chato's face. Your own bureau agent in Globe, a man named Harold Chen. He told me that the government spends a great deal of money sending Apache children to boarding schools. Food, clothing, transportation, teachers. It costs thousands of dollars per child per year. He suggested that if Apache families were willing to keep children on the reservations, it would save your government money. He said he was willing to approve such arrangements when possible. Whitney's face went red. That is highly irregular. There are procedures, protocols. Are the papers legal or not? Chato asked calmly. Whitney looked at them again, his lips pressed into a thin line. They appear to be in order, but— Then there is no but, Chato interrupted. I am offering to take these boys and raise them on my land at San Carlos. They will be fed, housed, and cared for at no expense to your government. Is this not what you want? To solve the Indian problem efficiently and cheaply? The words were pointed, deliberate. Maria could see that Chato knew exactly what he was doing. He was using the government's own logic against them, turning their desire for convenience into an opportunity to keep the twins together. Hendricks looked from the papers to Chato to Maria, and back again. Even if I accepted this proposal, the girl is not Apache. She would need her own arrangements. I have considered that as well, Chato said. I am inviting Miss Sandoval to live on my allotment as the caretaker for these children. She has been caring for them already. She knows how to feed them, how to comfort them. It would be cruel to take them from the only mother figure they have known. She is not their mother. Whitney objected. No, Maria said quietly. But I made a promise to their mother as she died. I promised I would keep them together. This man is offering a way for me to keep that promise. Hendricks rubbed his face with both hands. This was getting complicated in ways he had not anticipated. The girl's dramatic gesture in his office had already shaken him. Now this Apache man was showing up with legal documents that seemed designed specifically to create a solution to the exact problem they were facing. How did you even know about this situation? Hendricks asked Chato suspiciously.
How did you know to file these specific papers?
Chato met his gaze evenly. News travels even among defeated people. We talk to each other. We share information. When I heard about the white woman who refused to choose between twin brothers, I recognized something. I recognized someone trying to do right in a world that makes doing right almost impossible. So I found a way to help. But why? Whitney demanded. You do not know these children. Why take on such a burden? For the first time, Chato's calm facade cracked slightly. Pain flickered across his face. Because I could not save my own daughter. I stood here 3 weeks ago and watched as soldiers put her on a wagon with 30 other children. She screamed for me. She begged me to help her. And I could do nothing. His voice roughened. My daughter is somewhere in Santa Fe right now, in a building with strangers who are cutting her hair and forbidding her to speak Apache. She is crying at night, terrified and alone, and I cannot go to her. I cannot bring her home, but I can save these 2 boys. I can keep one Apache family intact. Maybe that gives my daughter's suffering some meaning. Maybe it means her sacrifice was not for nothing. The raw grief in his words silenced everyone. Even Whitney looked uncomfortable. Maria felt tears streaming down her face. She understood now. This was not just about the twins. This was about one broken man trying to salvage something good from the ruins of his world. Chato took a breath and continued, his voice steady again. I have land. I have permission from the Bureau to farm it. I will grow corn and beans. I will raise these boys to work hard and be useful. They will learn English because they must, but they will also learn Apache because they should. They will know who they are and where they come from. And maybe, when they are men, they will understand that their existence itself is a kind of resistance. Maria walked forward until she stood beside Chato. If you will have me, I will come. I will help raise these boys. I will teach them everything I can, and I will never forget the promise I made to their mother. Chato looked down at her, at this strange pale woman who spoke Apache like she was born to it. You are caught between 2 worlds like all of us now. Maybe together, we can teach these boys how to walk in both worlds without losing themselves. Colonel Hendricks looked at the papers again. He looked at Chato's determined face. He looked at Maria and the twins. He thought about that uncomfortable conversation in his office, about Maria forcing him to see the cruelty in the choice he was demanding she make. He was a military man. He followed orders, but he was also a man who had to live with his own conscience. And right now he was being offered a way out of a situation that had been eating at him more than he wanted to admit. "Mr. Whitney," he said slowly, "is there any legal reason we cannot approve this arrangement?" Whitney sputtered, clearly wanting to object, but the truth was written plainly on the documents. "It is unusual, but technically no. If the guardianship is approved and Miss Sandoval consents to the arrangement, there is no legal barrier." Hendricks nodded. He knew he might face questions later about this decision, but he also knew that if he forced Maria to choose between those babies, he would see her face in his dreams for the rest of his life. "Very well," he said. "I will approve this arrangement on a provisional basis. You will report monthly to the reservation agent. Any problems, any concerns, and the children will be removed and sent to Carlisle. Is that understood?" "Understood," Chato said. Maria closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me," Hendricks said gruffly. "Just take good care of those boys." As Chato and Maria prepared to leave the fort with the twins, the other Apache prisoners watched in stunned silence. Word spread quickly about. Colonel Hendricks stared at the papers in his hands, and Maria could see the moment when his relief turned to suspicion. The documents were too perfect, too specifically designed to address this exact situation. No one prepared guardianship papers this detailed without knowing exactly what problem they were solving. "Wait," Hendricks said, looking up at Chato sharply. "These papers are dated from 5 days ago. You filed them before you even came here, before I offered Miss Sandoval any choice about the children. How could you possibly know what was going to happen?" Chato's expression did not change, but Maria saw something flicker in his eyes. A calculation, perhaps, about how much truth to reveal. "I did not know for certain," Chato replied carefully. "But I could predict. I have watched your government's methods for years now. I know how you think. I know what you do with Apache children. When I heard there was a white woman at Fort Bowie caring for Apache twins, I knew eventually she would be forced to make an impossible choice, so I prepared for that moment." "You predicted my exact offer?" Hendricks' voice rose with indignation. "That she could take one child to Tucson?" "You or someone like you," Chato said with a shrug. "The details do not matter. The pattern is always the same. You find a way to separate children from their families. You call it help or education or opportunity. But the result is always the same. Broken bonds, lost connections. So yes, I prepared papers that would give these boys another option." Whitney stepped forward, his face red with anger. "This is manipulation. You have been planning this, working with sympathetic agents to undermine official policy. This is unacceptable, is it?" Chato turned to face him fully. "You speak of law and civilization, Mr. Whitney. You say the Apache must learn American ways, must follow American rules. So I have followed them. I filed the proper forms. I went through the correct channels. I used your own system exactly as it was designed to be used. And now you are angry because it worked in my favor instead of yours?" The logic of this was so clear, so undeniable, that Whitney actually took a step backward. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Chato pressed his advantage. "Let me tell you something about your civilization. You say you value family. You say children need stable homes with people who love them. You say education and opportunity are important. Well, I am offering these boys all of that. A family, a home, land of their own. The chance to learn both Apache and American ways. Why does that bother you so much?" "Because you are doing it to subvert the intent of the policy," Whitney finally managed to say. "No," Chato corrected him. "I am doing it to save 2 children from a cruel policy. There is a difference." Maria watched this exchange with growing admiration. Chato was not just arguing with these men. He was dismantling their justifications piece by piece, using their own words against them. She understood now why he had been both a warrior and a scout. He knew how to fight on multiple battlefields, including the one made of words and laws. Colonel Hendricks set the papers down on a nearby table. "Even if I wanted to approve this, which I am not sure I do, there are other considerations. Miss Sandoval is 18 years old, unmarried, and would be living on a reservation with a single Apache man. That creates an improper situation. People will talk. Questions will be raised. Then let them talk, Maria said, speaking up for the first time in this part of the conversation. I do not care what people think. I care about keeping my promise to those babies' mother. It is not just about what people think, Hendricks argued. It is about propriety, about maintaining proper standards. Chato laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Proper standards? You want to talk about proper standards? Right now, in the holding pens behind us, Apache mothers are being separated from their children. Some of those women are being forced onto one reservation, while their children are sent to schools 1,000 miles away. You call that proper? You call that maintaining standards? He gestured toward the area where the Apache prisoners were being held. My people had standards too. We valued family above everything. We believed children belonged with their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts and uncles. We believed that tearing a child from their family was one of the cruelest things you could do. But now you tell us those standards were wrong, that your ways are better. Yet when I try to use your ways to protect a family, you say it is improper. Hendricks had no answer for that. The silence stretched out, heavy with tension. Diego, the interpreter, who had been standing quietly to the side, finally spoke up. Colonel, if I may offer an observation, I have been translating at this fort for 2 years. I have watched hundreds of Apache families be torn apart. I have listened to mothers scream as their children are taken away. I have seen old people cry because they know they will die without ever seeing their grandchildren again. He paused, choosing his words carefully. What Mr. Chato is offering here is unusual, yes. But it is also humane. These 2 babies will have a home. They will have people who care for them. They will grow up knowing their culture and language while also learning to survive in the American world. Is that not better than sending them to an institution where they will be just 2 more numbers in a system that does not know their names? Whitney shook his head stubbornly. You are all missing the point. The boarding school system exists for a reason. It is designed to help these children escape the poverty and limitations of reservation life, to give them skills and education that will allow them to succeed in modern America. By beating them when they speak their own language? Maria asked quietly. By cutting their hair and burning their clothes and punishing them for remembering where they came from? Whitney's face flushed. That is an oversimplification. Discipline is sometimes necessary to break bad habits. Speaking Apache is not a bad habit, Maria said, her voice hard as stone. It is a language, a beautiful language that carries the wisdom and stories of generations, and you want to beat it out of children like it is something shameful. She stepped closer to Whitney, and he actually backed away from her intensity. I was raised Apache. I was loved by Apache people. They taught me how to find food in the desert, how to read the weather, how to sing songs that connect us to the land and the sky. They taught me that children are precious, that they should be protected and cherished. And now you want me to believe that all of that was worthless? That it would be better for these babies to forget everything and become copies of white children? I want them to have opportunities, Whitney protested weakly. Then give them the opportunity to be who they are, Maria shot back. Give them the opportunity to grow up with their brother. Give them the opportunity to be raised by people who will love them. That is worth more than any boarding school. Chato pulled another document from his shirt. Perhaps this will help clarify the situation. He handed it to Colonel Hendricks. Hendricks read it, his eyebrows rising. This is a letter from Harold Chen, the bureau agent in Globe. He is formally recommending this arrangement. He says that given the current budget constraints, keeping Apache children on reservations with family members is preferable to expensive boarding school placements when possible. Budget constraints, Chato said with a thin smile. Yes, I learned that your government cares very much about saving money. So I made sure Mr. Chen understood that my proposal would cost his office nothing. No transportation fees, no school fees, no administrative costs, just 2 Apache boys staying with family, being raised to be productive members of society. You are very clever, Hendricks said, and it was not entirely a compliment. I am desperate, Chato corrected. There is a difference. Clever people play games for fun. Desperate people do whatever they must to survive and protect what matters. I am doing what I must. He looked at Maria, then at the twins she held. These boys are not political statements to me. They are not tools in some game. They are children who deserve a chance to grow up whole and loved. That is all I want for them. Is that so terrible? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew the answer, even if some of them did not want to admit it. Colonel Hendricks looked at the various papers spread across the table. Guardianship documents, letters of recommendation, budget justifications. Chado had built a fortress of paperwork, using the government's own systems to protect two babies. It was impressive in a way that made Hendricks feel both frustrated and reluctantly respectful. "You have thought of everything," Hendricks said finally. "Not everything," Chado admitted. "I cannot guarantee the reservation will be a good place. I cannot promise these boys will have easy lives. I cannot even be certain that in 10 years, the government will not change its mind and come for them anyway. But I can give them today. I can give them tomorrow. I can give them a chance to grow up together, as brothers should. That is all any of us can promise, is it not? Just the next day and the next, and hope it is enough." Maria felt tears on her face again. This man, this stranger who had lost his own daughter, was fighting so hard for children who were not even his. It reminded her of why she loved the Apache people, why she had never wanted to leave them. They understood something about family and loyalty that went deeper than blood. Maria looked at Chado with new eyes now. She had heard his story, heard about his daughter being taken away. She understood his pain because she had lived among the Apache long enough to know what children meant to them. But there was something else she needed to understand before she could accept his offer. "Why would you really do this?" she asked him in Apache, so that only he could understand. "These are not your children. You have already lost so much. Why take on more burden?" Chado met her gaze steadily. When he answered, he also spoke in Apache, his voice low enough that the soldiers could not hear clearly. "You ask the right question, pale sister. You want to know if I have hidden reasons, if this is some trick or plan?" "I want to know the truth," Maria said simply. Chado glanced at the twins in her arms, then looked out the window at the holding pens where the other Apache prisoners waited. "I will tell you what I have not told them. When the soldiers came for my daughter, I did nothing. I stood there and watched. I could have fought. I could have run with her into the desert. Maybe we would have died, but at least I would have tried. Instead, I froze. I let them take her because I was afraid. Afraid of being killed, of making things worse, of losing the small bit of safety I had carved out as a scout." His voice roughened with emotion. "Every night since then, I see her face. I hear her calling for me, and I know that I failed her. Not because I was powerless, but because I chose safety over courage. I chose survival over fight, and that choice is eating me alive." Maria listened, understanding dawning on her face. "These boys," Chado continued, "they give me a chance to make a different choice. I cannot save my daughter, but I can save them. I can be brave for them in a way I was not brave for her. Maybe that does not erase what I did. Maybe I will always be the man who let his daughter be taken away, but at least I will also be the man who saved two brothers from being torn apart. That has to count for something." He looked at Maria directly. "You also want to know if this is about you. If I am doing this because I see a white woman who might make life easier for me on the reservation, the answer is no. I did not even know what you looked like until I rode through those gates. I came here for the boys, but I will not lie to you. Having you there will help. The reservation agents trust white faces more than Apache ones. They will listen to you in ways they never listen to me. Your presence might protect these boys in ways I cannot." "That is honest, at least," Maria said. "I have learned that lies cost too much," Chado replied. "So I will be honest with you about everything. If you come to San Carlos with us, life will be hard. The land I have claimed is not good land. That is why it was available to claim. The soil is poor. Water is scarce. We will work every day just to survive, and some days we will fail and go to bed hungry." He paused, making sure she understood. "The other Apache on the reservation will not know what to make of you. Some will see you as white and distrust you. Some will remember that you were raised by the Chiricahua and accept you. Some will think it is strange that you live with me but are not my wife. People will gossip. They will create stories about us that are not true." "I do not care about gossip," Maria said. "You say that now," Chado told her. "But gossip can be a weapon that cuts deep. Still, if you can bear it, if you can help me raise these boys to know who they are, then I promise you this. I will treat you with respect. I will protect you as I would protect my own sister. I will never ask you to be more than you choose to be. And I will make sure these boys grow up knowing that the promise you made to their mother was sacred." Maria looked down at Little Hawk and Singing Wind. They were both awake now, their dark eyes looking up at her with that strange awareness that babies sometimes have, as if they understand more than they should. She thought about the promise she had made. She thought about the dying woman who had trusted her with the most precious things she had. She thought about what it would mean to raise these boys, to teach them to walk in two worlds without losing themselves. "What will people call me?" she asked.
If I am not your wife, but I live on your land and help raise these children, what will I be?
Chato considered this. "Among my people we have a word. Nadande. It means one who helps, one who cares for others' children when needed. Not a mother, not a wife, but something honored in its own way. You would be Nadande to these boys. And you?" Maria asked. "What will you be to them?" "I will be what I should have been for my daughter. A protector. A teacher. Someone who does not fail them when they need me most." The words were simple, but Maria heard the weight of vow in them. This was not a man making empty promises. This was a man trying to redeem himself the only way he knew how. She turned to Colonel Hendricks, switching back to English. "I will go with him. I will help raise these boys. Whatever gossip comes, whatever hardship we face, I will keep my promise to their mother." Hendricks looked from Maria to Chato and back again. He saw something in their faces that made him think of the word determined. These two people, so different from each other, had found common purpose in the most unlikely of circumstances. Around them, the other people in the room waited. Diego the interpreter looked hopeful. Whitney the bureau representative looked frustrated but resigned. The soldiers at the door watched with expressions that ranged from confusion to sympathy. The silence stretched out. Everyone understood that this was one of those moments where a choice made now would echo for years to come. Hendricks could deny the request. He could force Maria to choose between the twins as originally planned. He could send Chato away and proceed with the standard policy. All of that would be within his authority, or he could do something different, something that bent the rules but honored a deeper principle. Hendricks thought about his own children back east. 2 boys, not much older than these twins would be in a few years. He tried to imagine someone forcing him to choose between them, to send one away and keep the other. The very thought made his chest tight with anger and fear. How could he do to these Apache babies what he would never accept for his own children? He could not. That was the simple truth. He could not very well. Hendricks said quietly, "I will approve this arrangement provisionally for 6 months. After that, the reservation agent will review the situation and determine if it should continue." Relief flooded through Maria so powerfully that her knees almost buckled. She clutched the twins tighter, tears streaming down her face. Chato did not smile, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Colonel. We will not disappoint you." "See that you do not," Hendricks replied gruffly, "and understand this. If I hear any reports of mistreatment, if those children are not properly cared for, if there are any problems at all, I will personally come to San Carlos and remove them." "Is that clear?" "Very clear," Chato agreed. Whitney made a disgusted sound. "This is a mistake. You are setting a precedent that will undermine the entire boarding school system. Other Apache will hear about this and demand similar arrangements." "Then maybe they should have them," Hendricks said, surprising everyone, including himself. "If Apache families are willing to care for their children, if they can demonstrate they can do so adequately, maybe we should let them. Maybe that is better for everyone than forcing children into schools hundreds of miles from home." "That is not policy," Whitney protested. "Maybe the policy is wrong," Hendricks said flatly. Maybe it is time someone said that out loud. The words hung in the air like thunder. Whitney stared at the colonel with shock. Diego the interpreter smiled. The soldiers at the door exchanged glances, and Chato, the Apache man who had been both warrior and scout, who had learned to fight with words as well as weapons, nodded once in acknowledgement. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Recognition from one man to another that sometimes doing the right thing required courage. Maria walked over to Chato, the twins still in her arms. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Chato replied. "There is a wagon train of Apache families being relocated to San Carlos. We will travel with them." "Tomorrow," Maria repeated, letting the words settle into her bones. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would leave Fort Bowie and begin a new life on the reservation. Tomorrow these 2 babies would start their journey to becoming men who knew both worlds. But tonight, for the first time in days, she could breathe. The impossible choice had been avoided. The promise would be kept. The brothers would stay together. She looked at Chato. This man who had lost his daughter but was trying to save someone else's sons. "Thank you," she said softly in Apache. "Thank you for being brave when I did not know how to be." "We will be brave together," Chato replied. "That is the only way any of us survive now, together." And in that moment, standing in the dusty office at Fort Bowie with a colonel who had bent the rules and a bureau representative who was fuming, Maria and Chato made an unspoken pact. They would protect these boys. They would teach them to be proud of who they were. They would show them how to live in a world that wanted to erase them. It would not be easy. It would not be perfect, but it would be real and honest and filled with the kind of love that does not give up, even when everything else has been taken away. Colonel Hendricks stood at the window of his office long after everyone else had left. Outside, he could see Maria and Chato making preparations to leave with the twins. The Apache families who would travel with them to San Carlos were gathering their few possessions, preparing for the journey that would begin at dawn. He thought about the conversation that had just happened, about Maria's whispered question that had cut through all his justifications, about Chato's careful manipulation of bureaucracy to save 2 babies, about his own decision to approve an arrangement that might get him questioned by his superiors. But mostly, he thought about the look on Whitney's face when Hendricks had said, maybe the policy was wrong. The bureau representative had stormed out of the office muttering about reports and complaints. Let him complain, Hendricks thought. Some things were worth the trouble. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Diego, the interpreter. "Colonel, I wanted to thank you," Diego said. "What you did today took courage." "Or foolishness," Hendricks replied. "Time will tell which." "Sometimes they are the same thing," Diego said with a slight smile. "But I have been at this fort for 2 years. I have watched many children be taken from their families. Today was the first time I saw someone in authority choose mercy over policy. That will be remembered." After Diego left, Hendricks sat down and began writing his report. He knew he had to frame this carefully. The arrangement with Chato was legal according to the documents, but the spirit of it went against the broader push to assimilate Apache children through boarding schools. He would have to emphasize the cost savings, the family connection, the provisional nature of the approval. He would have to make it sound like a practical decision rather than a moral one. But as he wrote, he kept stopping to look out the window at Maria holding those twins. And he kept thinking about his own sons back east and how he would feel if someone tried to separate them. The next morning came quickly. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky when the wagon train began to assemble. There were about 40 Apache people in this group, mostly women and children and old men. The warriors were gone, either dead or imprisoned at more distant locations. These were the survivors, the ones the government considered harmless enough to relocate to the reservation. Maria stood beside the wagon she would ride in, the twins bundled in blankets against the morning cold. She had changed into fresh clothes, a simple dress that one of the Apache women had given her. It was a gesture of acceptance, of welcome into their uncertain future. Chato was checking the wagon wheels and harness, making sure everything was secure for the journey. He moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, though Maria suspected that no matter how many times you were forcibly relocated, it never became easier. Some of the soldiers came to watch the departure. A few of them looked relieved, glad to see this particular problem resolved. Others looked uncomfortable, as if they were not sure whether to feel proud of their work or ashamed of it. Colonel Hendricks walked out to the assembly area. He approached Maria and Chato, and for a moment none of them spoke. There were too many things that could be said and no easy way to say them. Finally, Hendricks addressed Chato. "The reservation agent is named Thomas Whitfield. He is a fair man by and large, but he has rules he must follow. Do not give him reason to question this arrangement." "We will not," Chato assured him. Hendricks turned to Maria. "Miss Sandoval, if at any time you wish to leave the reservation, you need only send word. The mission in Tucson will still accept you. You are not a prisoner. You understand that?" "I understand," Maria said, "but I will not leave. I made a promise." "Promises can be expensive," Hendricks warned her. "So can broken ones," Maria replied. Hendricks almost smiled at that. "You are a stubborn young woman." "I learned from stubborn people," Maria said, and this time she did smile, thinking of the Apache woman who had raised her. As the wagon train began to move out, other Apache families watched silently. They had all heard what happened, how the white woman had refused to choose between the twins, how Chato had appeared with papers to save them. The story was already spreading, being repeated in whispers, becoming something larger than the simple facts. An old woman approached Maria just before she climbed into the wagon. The woman reached up and touched Maria's pale hair gently, then touched the foreheads of both twins. She spoke in Apache, her voice cracked with age but strong with conviction. "You have shown us that love is stronger than law, that a promise kept is worth more than safety. May the spirits protect you and these boys. May you always walk in beauty even when the path is hard." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, grandmother." The old woman nodded and stepped back, joining the other families who were loading onto wagons. As Maria climbed up with the twins, Chato took the reins of their wagon. He did not look back at Fort Bowie as they pulled away. He had spent too many years looking backward. Now it was time to look forward, toward whatever future they could build. The journey to San Carlos took 5 days. The desert was harsh, the sun merciless during the day and the cold bitter at night. But the Apache families traveled together, helping each other, sharing what little they had. Maria learned quickly that survival on the reservation would require cooperation, not just between her and Chato, but with everyone. Other Apache women taught her things during the journey. How to make the twins' formula last longer by mixing it with certain herbs. How to keep babies quiet when the dust storms came. How to spot the plants that could soothe fever or upset stomachs. They taught her not because she asked, but because she was now one of them. She had chosen their path, and that made her family. Chato spent the evenings talking with the men, learning what conditions were like at San Carlos. The news was not encouraging. Food rations were often late or insufficient. The land was difficult to farm. The reservation agent changed the rules frequently, sometimes making it nearly impossible to know what was allowed and what was not. "We will manage," Chato told Maria one night as they sat by a small fire, the twins sleeping between them. "We always manage. That is what we Apache do. We survive. Is survival enough?" Maria asked quietly. Chato looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. "Sometimes survival is everything. Sometimes just making it to the next sunrise is a victory. But no, you are right. Survival alone is not enough. We must also remember. We must teach these boys their language, their songs, their stories. We must make sure that even as they learn to live in the white man's world, they never forget they are Apache." How do we do both? Maria wondered. How do we teach them to be Apache while also teaching them to survive in a world that wants them to forget they are Apache? "That," Chato said with a tired smile, "is the question our people will be asking for generations to come. We will figure it out together, one day at a time." When they finally reached San Carlos, Maria's heart sank. The reservation was even more desolate than she had imagined. Rough wooden buildings scattered across dry, barren land. Groups of Apache people living in canvas tents or crude shelters. Children with hollow eyes and thin faces. The despair was almost visible in the air. Chato's land was on the edge of the reservation, a plot of rocky soil with a small creek that ran dry for much of the year. There was a tiny cabin, barely more than a shack with a leaking roof and gaps in the walls. "This is home," Chato said, and Maria heard the apology in his voice. "It is not much." "It is enough," Maria said firmly. She had not come here expecting comfort. She had come to keep a promise. This rough cabin would do. They spent the first weeks just making the place livable. Chato fixed the roof while Maria cleaned the interior and made sleeping areas. Other Apache families stopped by, curious about the white woman who had chosen to live on the reservation. Some were welcoming. Others were suspicious. Maria understood both reactions. The twins thrived despite the harsh conditions. Little Hawk grew strong and alert, always watching everything with intense focus. Singing Wind was gentler, more contemplative, but just as healthy. Maria sang to them every night, mixing Apache lullabies with Spanish songs she barely remembered from her own infancy. 6 months passed. The reservation agent, Thomas Whitfield, came to inspect the situation as required by Colonel Hendricks. He looked at the cabin, at the small garden Chato had managed to coax from the difficult soil, at the twins who were now nearly a year old and thriving. "This is unusual," Whitfield said, frowning. "Very unusual, but it is working," Chato pointed out. "The boys are healthy. They are cared for." We are not asking the government for any assistance beyond the basic rations provided to all families. Whitfield walked around the property, examining everything with a critical eye. Maria held her breath, wondering if he would find some reason to take the twins away after all. But finally he nodded. Continue as you are. I will report that the arrangement is satisfactory. For now. After he left, Maria and Chato exhaled in relief. They had passed the first test. But they both knew there would be more tests to come, more challenges, more moments when someone might question whether this unusual family should be allowed to exist. Years passed. The twins grew from babies to toddlers to young boys. They learned to speak both Apache and English.